peaceful management of our differences is nowhere better expressed than in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter guarantees that our cherished individual rights are subject only to the reasonable limits that are necessary for life in a free and peaceful democracy.
Hi, Queen. Those are some nice words. It would be a shame if they were hollow and meant as platitudes while your government trampled on our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right? But you'll never hear about it because CBC and CTV are too busy telling you how everything that's wrong in Canada is because of Poilievre and Trump for some reason. Like these sickening segments that just aired, so let's take a look at those. But while we're at it, it's hard to hold the government accountable when your prime minister runs away from questions in parliament. So can you guess Carney's attendance? Is it 80%? Maybe 60%? Worse, 40%? It doesn't matter because you won't believe it anyways when I tell you. A bit like how unbelievable the visa fraud coming from Indians that was just uncovered in the United States. Uh-oh, does it mean we also have visa fraud here in Canada? My name is Ali Dango and this is The Right Call. Like, share, subscribe, hype this video up. Any interaction on this channel helps push the truth out and maybe someday help break that CBC-induced coma that so many Canadians are under. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because if you like common sense, you're in the right place.
Evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk
your
about
elections in this country. We're like a third world country. Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC and CBS and CNN.
But Mr. President,
you're one-sided crooked networks. Right, let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the rain with you.
I know.
I've sat in the rain with you for an hour, on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press because you know what?
Mr. President,
a country can never be great with a dishonest
Listen,
press.
we traveled all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
He crushed a microphone. Oh my God. A country can never be great with a dishonest press. I might not make friends, but until the media starts being level-headed instead of behaving like activists, this is exactly the kind of treatment that should be reserved for them. And nowhere is activism in the media better exemplified than in Canada. When you watch the segment I'm about to play, tell me, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Comment it down below.
There were a whole lot of competing political messages this week on the true state of the Canadian economy, with the opposition Conservatives seeking to redefine a technical recession as a full-blown recession and pin the blame for it on Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Canada's had 2 consecutive quarters of shrinking GDP, the only country in the G20 that can say that. Will the Prime Minister tell us whether we are in a recession or a technical recession?
What this government is doing is putting in place the foundations of an economy that will be stronger, more resilient, more independent.
The Prime Minister, once again, is failing the Canadian people by refusing to tell them the truth, that he caused a recession.
The data is going to be uneven, and we see some weakness. You have these cross currents as the economy is being fundamentally transformed. We're going to continue to work. We're making progress, but there's more to be done.
But throughout the week, economists, the major banks, and the Bank of Canada all pushed back on the notion that Canada is truly in a recession of any kind. And by the end of the week, a new jobs report added some weight to that side of the debate. Statistics Canada reported today that the Canadian economy added 88,000 jobs in May. The unemployment rate, well, it fell to 6.6% from 6.9% in April. And today, the C.D. Howe Institute...
Like, that's a good thing. That's 6.6%. Meanwhile, the U.S. is like at 4.6 or maybe 4.3%.
Business Cycle Council, the unofficial authority of what is or isn't a recession, ruled it is too early to conclude that the Canadian economy is in a recession because the data doesn't meet the standard of a pronounced, persistent, and pervasive decline in real economic activity. Now, against the backdrop of that debate, the government took some big decisions on big tech, rolling back a ruling to make streaming companies pay more for Canadian content while rolling out a strategy to deal with the opportunities and the threats presented by artificial intelligence. And one more thing. Dominic LeBlanc, he went to Washington to try to jolt those pesky Kuzma talks along. So, lots to chew over with our party insiders. Greg McKee.
Yeah, me too. I'm confused. Am I watching a journalist or a liberal spokesperson? Because he's literally quoting liberal talking points right here. But let's go back for a second because they love to say we're not in a technical recession.
But throughout the week, economists, the major banks, and the Bank of Canada all pushed back on the notion that Canada is truly in a recession of any kind.
That's weird because I heard a certain someone once talk exactly about what the definition of a technical recession was.
Well, look, the technical definition of a technical recession is just that. It's 2 quarters of flat or negative growth.
Oh, sorry, David Cochrane. I was only quoting Carney circa a few years ago before he was Prime Minister. But it's just CBC, right? Nah.
I do think you have to lay some, plant some seeds. but I also largely agree with Scott that the seeds they're planting are the wrong ones in terms of tone. I think you want to be pointing this stuff out, but with like sadness and regret, with a solemn tone, and put the focus on delivering results. Where I think that's where the Carney government is going to be, to Tom's point, more vulnerable over time if they don't actually get the resource projects done. Those sorts of things. I think that's a better vector of attack, because I think the one that they're on right now looks like Poilievre is applying to be a-hole in chief, and I just don't think that's the way to get more popular with the public. It doesn't improve your favorabilities to look like a jerk all the time, and I think he's at risk of doing that.
A-hole in chief, being a jerk all the time. Yeah, that's not biased at all. I keep pointing this obsession that the media has of hyper-focusing on Poilievre. Canada's in a recession. Our job numbers are going down. We have temporary foreign worker fraud left and right. We'll talk about that in a second. We have the CUSMA/USMCA talks that are coming up. Our trade deals have never happening. People are suffering in Canada. Food bank is at an all-time high. I could go on and on and on. But CTV decides to hold a panel. And over the 7-minute-long panel, they barely touch about these issues brought forth by the Carney government. And instead, they only talk about Poilievre. Oh, you don't believe me? Okay, here he goes.
He's saying that Poilievre seems to be...
That's the political strategy of Pierre Poilievre.
That early for Poilievre to be trying to do...
The choices that Pierre Poilievre seems to be...
Looks like Poilievre is...
To block Poilievre and his...
Pierre Poilievre looks like...
Panel bros and broettes, I got news for you. Poilievre is not the government, and actually hasn't been for 11 years. See, why does our media spend more time and resources attacking the opposition, which is not the government, again, than they do holding the majority government accountable? The majority government that has absolute power, may I add. That's the whole point of a majority government. Carney has the majority. Poilievre can't stop anything, can't do anything, really can't interject in much. He can make noise, but that's about it. Liberals have been in power for 11 years. Conservatives have not had any effect on the state of Canada now, on the well-being of Canada for all this time. So why the constant attacks? To me, it's the usual. It's fear. It's quite obvious. And to be honest, I see this as a seal of approval. The more the media attacks someone, the more I tend to trust this individual. Maybe I'm a little cuckoo in the head, could be, and I'm sure some people will say so in the comments, but to me, they must be doing something right because they get the ire of these people. But to me, the state of our media is the single greatest threat to Canada's democracy and well-being of any issues we're facing. Yes, more than immigration, more than the economy, more than a majority liberal government. Why? Because unless we have a fair and free media that actually brings facts and information to the Canadians, then any tyrant, any leader, anyone, whether it's the Liberals or the Conservatives, could bamboozle Canadians. Anyone could pass anything. There's a lack of discourse, a lack of facts and truth. It's just a narrative being pushed forward. And sadly, people are so busy with their lives. You're busy, I'm busy, we're all busy, so that most people, they're just going to go online. They're going to see, okay, what does the pundit say? And I'll go with that. They must know more because they're pundits. Let me tell you the truth. Most people on these panels are not smarter than you, okay? Take it from me. It's not that hard to end up being on TV. Okay, to give you an idea, I ended up on Fox News because I put out one Instagram video that talks about the birth rate in Europe. Elon Musk retweeted it, and then boom, I'm on Fox News talking about European birth rate like I'm some expert. And let me tell you, I'm no expert. Sure, I quoted data, I looked at facts, I researched my points, but it's not like I've been a European fertility expert that's freaking studied his entire life in this, and yet I was on Fox News talking about it. But you think it's any different on CBC? It's even worse. On CTV, even worse. The only difference between them and me when I went on Fox News is that I actually quoted data and I spoke to what I had researched from people that are way smarter than me. Meanwhile, these guys, they go on there and they make their opinions sound like it is the truth. And how dare you question them? And to be honest, that probably explains why Canadians hate Americans these days. Not all Canadians, of course, but mostly one side of the aisle. It's not an organic feeling. It was never like that in the history of Canada. So to me, something being so devoid of logic has to be artificially created. And of course, it's created by people like that.
And we have to look at the jobs that are being created. What are they? Are they like long-term, well-paid jobs, or are they, we're entering the summer season with tourism and services, short-term jobs that will disappear come the fall? What are we talking about? Right now, it's kind of trying to make sure that things are steady until we reach finally some kind of an agreement with the United States. If we do.
And that's the other thing. There are so many things that,
well, he promised he would. He promised he would manage that relationship, right? And if you don't get a deal with the United States, then it's gonna really hurt the Canadian economy, because you can't replace the Americans with another trade partner. You can make all the kind of trade deals, bilateral trade deals with Singapore if you want. It's not gonna replace the United States.
But Najud,
and this is what I find insidious. They claim that they are in fact objective and bipartisan in their reporting, but what they do is they hide little bits of factual truth, like this segment right there that Carl just said. Factual, completely true, but they hide it in the middle of interviews, which, to be honest, very few people actually watch.
Mr. Carney has already spent billions of extra dollars that some will argue, that the country doesn't have unless we're content and comfortable with pushing up the deficit and pushing up the debt. And Mr. Carney has promised to rein in government spending. He's promised to slash that sort of thing. And so I don't know at what point, they're making these one-off decisions, the grocery benefit being one of them. It costs several $1 billion, and that's paid for by debt and deficit. Is that sustainable for Canadians? Again, we go back to the political argument. Do Canadians, if you get, $500 today, that's going to help feed your family for 2 weeks, are you okay with that if it means in a year there's less money for, roads in your community because the government's transfer payments for infrastructure have to go down? Right. Do people make that calculus? I don't think they do. For Mr. Carney, it's going to be a math equation. And do people feel better off longer term? I don't know that the world right now is such that any benefit, any premium, any tax break is really going to make anybody feel any better.
Now, if only all these talking points were in the headlines or at the top of articles, but they're not. Again, they're in the middle of a Sunday scrum that nobody watches. Meanwhile, the primetime news segments or the top line of articles are not saying it. And let's be honest, headlines and primetime news reels, that's the only thing people watch, and they know it. So there's this big news coming out of the US, and you know what? We need to talk about it for a simple reason that it sheds massive lights and crazy questions on what's going on here domestically. So in India, police arrested 11 suspects and uncovered fake documents, degrees, and credentials in medicine, nursing, and engineering that were being sold for as little as $1,400 each and potentially used in H-1B job applications abroad. One school, Manav Bharti University, had issued 36,000 bogus degrees since 2010 compared to just 5,400 real ones.
The holders since 2015. Over 70% came from India and nearly 12% from China. And when you zoom in on this map you're looking at, you can see where most are being hired. The dark red spots show a high density of H-1B visa holders. And now we're learning more about the fraud within the program. One former official tells Newsweek that up to 90% of applications, 90% from India, contain fraudulent documents or involve unqualified applicants. And finance law enforcement in India claim it has uncovered a network of universities that produce fake degrees, which were possibly used to obtain these high-skilled H-1B visas, including one school which allegedly stole over 36,000 fake degrees, sold, I should say. It cost as little as $1,400 for one of those. And while these are supposed to be high-skilled employees, during almost all of Biden's time in office, 83% got junior or entry-level positions. And now Texas is taking action, cracking down on those abusing the program.
90% of applications were fraudulent? Let me repeat that. 90%? The H-1B visa, by the way, is the typical standard work visa for the United States, for those who don't know. So just by comparison, can we assume that similar level of fraud is happening and being committed in Canada with the temporary foreign workers and also the LMIAs, right? The labor market impact assessment workers? Because an LMIA actually requires credentials, skills, or education to be demonstrated by the applicant. It's supposed to be about importing a specific talent into the country to fulfill a position that you couldn't find with domestic workers. Like, for example, when I was running a tech company, we did have some LMIA workers, and I remember the process of applying for it. It was quite tedious. And the reason why we had an LMIA worker was that we were developing a B2B transactional system, one that was very peculiar in the kind of requirements and specifications we needed. And we looked here domestically for an engineer that knew intimately the requirements of developing that system. And honestly, we couldn't find one. So we went to go get a guy who was from Egypt, but had been working at the University of Monterrey in in Mexico for many years, developing for them a specific transactional system for students to pay to university. But some of the requirements of that system in Mexico kind of mimicked the requirements we had here. And when we demonstrated that this individual had the specific skill set we were looking for, we were issued that LMIA. However, we're honest individuals. Is it far-fetched to think that plenty of companies are not looking that deep into it, and plenty of fraudulent applicants coming from countries like India just fake their degrees or their credentials or their CV/resume, depending where in the world you are at, in order to get the job? Well, it appears that it does happen in the US, so I don't think it's far-fetched to think it's happening in Canada. Now, for the temporary foreign workers program, the scheme is even darker. Consultants in India will sell the idea of, come to Canada, you'll get free healthcare, the government will pay for you, you'll have this dream life. They really do that. They run ads in those countries. And then on top of that, they'll promise that they'll help you find a job and that you can bring your entire family, your parents, your cousins, your uncles, your entire ancestors if you could. But all you gotta do is pay us, the consultant, that is. Then after that, the temporary foreign worker applicants and their entire family, may I add, pool their money together because, you know what, it ain't cheap. It's up to $75,000. And for a lot of them, that's generational wealth that they're putting together, generational savings, not wealth, but savings that they're putting together. But here's where the entire scheme gets doubly scammy because a consultant will take that money, then turn around and pay a Canadian employer, a Canadian company, anywhere between $30,000 to $40,000 to hire that temporary foreign worker. And then that becomes the entire business model for many companies in Canada, just being a temporary foreign worker mill. The actual business becomes secondary, but hiring foreign workers become their primary driver of revenue. Because on top of that, all that money is paid cash, so you know what? Best believe it ain't being taxed. Those temporary foreign workers then come to Canada and end up being forced to work 70, 80, 90-hour weeks for very little pay and by force, because they're told that otherwise, if they don't do it, guess what? They're going to be fired and shipped back to India. Oh, and there goes that $75,000 they paid a consultant. They're now completely devoid of any money. And this is not just me saying it. The UN, which is an organization I despise, but even the UN is calling this modern day slavery. Yeah, we have modern day slavery in Canada, and everyone loses under this scheme, except for the consultant back in India that makes a shit ton of money, and the Canadian companies here that are turning into TFW mills. Because the temporary foreign worker is exploited big time. Meanwhile, our youth is displaced from jobs, low-skilled jobs that they normally would have for summer or for part-time during the school year, you name it. They have a hard time finding jobs. Then all of our healthcare gets overloaded. All the other infrastructure also gets overloaded. The system is completely choked. The food banks are being taken by assault because all these TFWs now don't have enough to live. So they go to food banks, which is hurting, again, domestic Canadians. And all that because they were sold a lie by oftentimes two unscrupulous entities, the consultant and the company. And what is our government doing about this? Well, sweet nothing, of course, because lobbyists keep pushing for this scheme to go on. I mean, this article from 2025, Tim Hortons lobbied MPs for more temporary foreign workers over the last 18 months. I mean, it's out in the open. This is not some crazy conspiracy. By the way, the lobbyist registry is publicly searchable. You can go in there and see for yourself. Actually, why don't we just do it ourselves? Here, I searched Tim Hortons, which the real brand is actually called the Restaurant Brands International, right? That's the private equity firm that owns them. Look at all these meetings that were had between the government and the lobbyist that represents them. I'm not making this up. It's easily searchable. I mean, I'm going to stop scrolling, but it keeps going and on and on and on and on. And meanwhile, back in the US, they keep digging for fraud, and guess what? They keep uncovering crazy stuff.
In a letter to every governor in America, no one had ever held the states accountable. The federal government funds the food stamp program. We send hundreds of millions of dollars a day to the states, but there'd never been a back-end accountability on how is that money getting spent. So we asked all the states to partner with us. It's time to have accountability. The red states, of course, did. And with that red state data, we found 200,000 dead people getting food stamps. We found 500,000 people that were getting more than one benefit. And y'all, this was in the red states. The blue states wouldn't give us the data. They're suing us. We're in massive litigation right now, looking to cut those funds off until they give us that data. But the fraud is so rampant and so stunning that when the president, the vice president, and our team talks about, you know, when we can root all this fraud out, we're going to really be able to cut the deficit, make sure we're protecting the taxpayer, but also make sure we're protecting the families that rely on these programs at the same time by getting the fraud out.
But see, at least they're talking about it in the South. The president is aware of it and not only fighting to uncover it, but to end the fraud. Of course, the roadblock is the decentralized nature of the US. Being a republic, each state is fairly sovereign and has a lot of power. So as such, some states, mostly blue states, aka Democrat states, are protecting defrosters for some reason. So that's hindering the progress. But they're aware of it. And meanwhile, in Canada, no one is looking at it. No one won't even mention it. At least no one in power, that is. And that's because those in power benefit from it. And it's damn hard to uncover fraud or just to hold the government to account when the government is doing everything in its power to run away from accountability. I mean, is he a coward or simply an autocrat? Carney avoids question period like the plague. Harper's attendance during question period was 65%. Trudeau's attendance was 41.5%. Abysmal. Already bad. And I remember back then thinking to myself, he's all clearly avoiding it. But mind you, Carney's is even more abysmal. It is downright, at this point, negligent. He's only attended 26.8% of question periods so far. The point of responsible government in the Westminster parliamentary system is the ability for the official opposition and other parties' MPs to question the government that's in power, to hold them to account, to get answers for Canadians. Look, I get that the Prime Minister can have his deputies answer the questions on his behalf. And I also don't expect 100% attendance. Really, I don't. Because, there are some matters that require attention. There's some trips abroad to be had. Some. Emphasis on some. Not being gone all the time. And there's other conflicts in scheduling, obviously. But there's also a point to be made about diverting so drastically from the norm and from what your predecessors did. One has to wonder where his priorities lie. And it gives rise to questions of contempt for the system that he's supposed to represent. But I mean, are we surprised? Our PM has been contemptuous of the system since before he was even elected. From being anointed as Prime Minister by a party that pulled all the tricks to ensure that he faced no challenges during the leadership race, by disqualifying his biggest opponents on dubious grounds, to rejecting hundreds of thousands of Liberal members' votes during the leadership election, and then manufacturing a majority through alleged bribes and backroom deals, and now refusing to stand in Parliament to answer questions from the opposition. Really, I'm serious. I'm starting to wonder, do we have a Democratic Prime Minister or do we just have an autocrat? Now, if you've enjoyed this report and want to find a way to get involved with the channel, aside from liking, sharing, subbing, commenting, hyping this video up, if you want to go a step further and help financially, I have a Patreon. The link is in the description. There's also a PayPal if you want to do it, just one-time donation. All contribution helps tremendously in allowing this channel to spend more time researching, uncovering the truth, and reporting on what's going on with the state of Canada, the West, the US, the things that affect us. Now, if you haven't seen the last episode, we break down that brand new grocery rebates, the grocery benefits that we've all been sent, or actually, no, not all of us. We didn't all receive that money, just some very specific people. It's called redistribution of wealth, but of course, that's not the actual name of it. That would be bad. But I made a video breaking down the entire GST, the grocery benefits. We also talk about AI, that is Canadian AI that Carney is launching. We find money for everything these days. And also a little bit about the job gains, because like mentioned earlier in this episode, there has been job gains, but the truth is not what they're telling you as usual. For the time being, though, my name is Elliot Daniel, and I'll see you next report.